Hello and welcome back. Come join me, Megan, and my special guest, Betty, and sit for a spell round the cauldron while we talk about witchcraft, polytheism, and the intersection of magic and mundane. I saw something recently that really got under my skin and I wanted to talk about it, but I didn't want to do it alone. So I did the next best thing. I invited a friend of mine, Betty, better known as the Witch from the North on social media, to come on the show with me and talk about the commodification of witchcraft and spirituality. We dig into why our community gets inundated with ads, products, and things we supposedly need. We talk about how this is harmful to the wider spiritual community, but that it's also been a bit helpful. We also give our own perspectives on what we think can be done to break out of the cycle of consumerism within our practices. But first, let's go over some important dates for the month of April. First, the new moon is on April 1st, a funny day to be a new moon as it's also April Fool's Day, but whatever. The full moon is on April 16th. This is the full pink moon, and it's also the first full moon after the spring equinox. One other important date for April is April 22nd. This is Earth Day, an annual event to demonstrate support for environmental protections. As pagans, we are generally people that care about the earth, being good stewards to the land around us locally and globally. Earth Day is a good reminder to everyone around the world that we only have one planet and we need to care for her so that future generations will still have a place to call home. As always, a wonderful shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. It truly means the world to me, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you'd like to help support the show, feel free to join me on Patreon for as little as $1 a month and get patron exclusive perks and content. With that being said, let's get into the show. Thank you so much, Betty, for being here and talking with me today about this fun subject of commodification and spirituality. Before we start our rambling discussion, because I'm sure we both have plenty to say on the subject, would you like to introduce yourself for anybody that is listening?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today, Megan. For those who don't know, my name is Betty Ann, and I am known as the Witch from the North on Instagram. And sometimes I post to YouTube. I did previously have a podcast, but that's on hiatus, so that's kind of up in the air. But yeah, so you can find me on Instagram if you'd like to follow along.
Yay, awesome. And I'll leave links to all of your stuff in the show notes for anybody, because I definitely recommend for anyone out there to go follow you too. I feel like we have become quite good friends over the course of meeting each other on social media. So we are talking about what I think can possibly be a beefy subject, and that is the commodification of spirituality and witchcraft practices. So first, the inspiration for this particular topic hit me because I was scrolling through my Facebook feed, as you do when you're bored, and I saw a video that came up in my recommended ads for a crystal vending machine. Where you go to a mall and you walk up to this big pink vending machine and it's full of crystals. And I immediately said, I hate it. I hate it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I went when you told me about that too. I was like,
yeah. And it's the same kind of feeling I get when I go to like Walmart or Five Below. I'm not sure what the equivalent for those stores is outside of the United States. And they have sage bundles that are covered in like dried flowers that look like plastic, or they're dyed red so they can be quote unquote dragon's blood sage. And I have pictures of them too, and I'm like, I hate it. I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
I completely agree. I see the same thing here in Canada. We do have Walmart. I'm not sure what the equivalent would be to the other store that you had mentioned, but we do have some new age spirituality sort of alternative stores like that in our malls and whatnot. And I dislike seeing some of the stuff that they're promoting and they're advertising as well.
Yeah. Well, and like Five Below is an interesting mixture of a bunch of stuff. Everything is $5 and under. And they've got like electronics and toys, and it's almost like a dollar store, but
Yeah,
$5 and under.
right.
Um, so okay, so what do I mean when I say the commodification of spirituality? And it's basically where where we end up with things like crystal vending machines or sacred herbs being sold in Walmart, and just things being pushed out for mass consumption that make very large corporations very large amounts of money.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what do you view it any different? Do you have more thoughts to say on that? My brain has just sort of minimized it a little bit.
No, absolutely. I agree. I was doing a little bit of research before our meeting today, and I found a definition that I kind of leaned in towards because it seemed to kind of encompass everything that I thought of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So if you don't mind, I'll just read the
Yeah, go for it.
definition. Sure. Okay, so I see it as commodification of religion or spirituality refers to religious symbols becoming commodities. So basically, objects of consumption readily available in the quote unquote supermarket of religion.
Mm-mm. You know what? You read that definition and it immediately reminded me of all the people. They get mad when people go to Hot Topic and buy the pentacle earrings. And they're like, you're not Wiccan. You shouldn't be wearing those because you don't know what it means.
Mm-hmm.
That's where my brain went. But yeah, for sure, that seems to be a very accurate definition. It falls in line with where my brain is with this subject. And I want to talk about too the role that you mentioned of how social media has come into play with this. And
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking last night while I was laying in bed about how Instagram used to be a place to share pictures with your family and friends. You have the people that you follow and the people that follow you. And it started out as a picture sharing platform, but now I can't be on Instagram without seeing ads
Mm-hmm.
and business related posts or reels even. And as someone that has a very small business myself, I get it. It's a marketing tool now, but it definitely has played the role of getting things like crystals and herbs and spell oils. Even I've seen those, the really pretty ones in glass jars that are full of like mica or glitter that sparkle.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely think that social media has played a larger role in pushing everything out there, whether that be to the detriment of the community or not, I'm not sure. um,
I think it's worth having a discussion over because I mean we live in a capitalist society, right?
mhm,
That's our reality,
for
and
sure.
so a lot of the times it's the commodification equals profit, and most often people seeking clout. But it also it's twofold because, as you said, we're seeing a lot of people online who are business owners and who use this platform as a way for their living.
Mhm.
They're trying to make a living. They're trying to provide for their family, and so, as you said, it's kind of twofold. Like you understand where it's coming from, but it's taken such a um, I don't know. It's taken on such a complex form where, like, we're seeing so much come out of this
Mhm.
commodification, and you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. And I definitely get that. Like, it started out small, at least the way I've seen it. It started out with small businesses, people, selling the mineral specimens that they've rock hounded. They got them themselves and they're turning around and selling them. But then with the invention of hashtags and trending hashtags, larger corporations have now seen what people are talking about. And it immediately brought to my mind the commercial, I think it was, for Facebook groups. And this commercial was on TV. And it had a couple of people in it where someone was looking for astrology and let's manifest our future, and all of the buzzwords that we see in the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual community, because they're picking it up from the trending hashtags of what we itty bitty people are talking about. And I think that's one of the major issues that I have with the commodification of spirituality and religious symbols. I
Mm-hmm.
have no issue with a small business owner who is, doing what they do and selling their, their crystals or their creations, or, running a small business, because the majority of the time, in my experience at least, those small business owners are putting that money back into the community. They are, whether that be the witchy community or their actual area, their lived in community. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
it matters. Um, but then those big corporations, they don't care about us. We
Mm-hmm.
have seen time and time again, corporations are willing to profit off of the trends that we have, and not give credit where credit is due and give money back into the community that they took from, pretty
Mm-hmm.
much.
No,
Um,
I absolutely agree. And that's again, that's where, the presence of social media and being able to reach such large numbers of people has greatly impacted the commodification of spirituality in both positive ways and negative ways, because as you said, we see people come in who are, less than honest with their intentions, seeking to make profit or to gain clout
mhm.
from doing this. And so, like, they're not coming from a place where they are seeking to have, their own spiritual connections or their own spiritual journey, and it's more for making a quick buck and feeding it back into the larger corporations.
Right, exactly. And it's like my brain was going a direction, but then I decided not to go that direction. Like with my own sort of small business with my crochet stuff, that's not profitable. If I'm being entirely honest, it's it's the cycle of capitalism and these large corporations versus the smaller businesses, because something can take me, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours to make. I'm going to charge 40, 50, $60 for it because my time is valuable. But
Hmm.
then the people who are in these cycles with capitalism and who are like below the poverty line, or people can't just pay all that money for handmade generally. But these large corporations who pay their workers pennies on a dollar, who take advantage of, the trends, and they buy things in bulk, and they can afford to pass that off. I don't feel like that's quite the right phrase, but they can make their stuff cheaper because they
Hmm.
can eat the cost because they don't pay their work. It's this whole thing. Um, yeah.
It's a vicious cycle, and it's like you said, it's that it's a systemic issue, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
capitalism is only seeking to feed into back into that 1% of people. So they're targeting the individuals who, don't have $50 to $60 to spend on an item and are seeking more budget friendly ways. And there's no shame to people who don't
Mm-hmm.
have the money to spend on it,
Oh,
but
for sure.
that's their target audience, right? Those are the people that they're looking to market or target. So like you said, with the crystal vending machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like I watched the video and I did a little bit of digging into the vending machine itself. There's nothing in there under, or I mean over like $7.
Mhm.
And I'm like, for one, where are you getting your crystals? Because are you getting them from a place that uses unethical business standards and who pays for child labor or slave labor, or who doesn't pay their workers at all? You know,
That's
The
where my
crystal
mind went
mining
to.
industry is massive, and depending on where you are, massively unethical.
Right. And then I think it becomes this really difficult balancing act because, like, as somebody who is spiritual, I don't want to say or refer to myself as a consumer,
Hmm.
right? I don't know why, but that word feels icky to me.
Yeah, no, I relate. I relate.
But at the same time, we do have to think of those things as an individual who is in this capitalist society, this society that looks to make profit off of, like you said, child labor and the mining of unethical mining of crystals. So those are things that we have to consider where we're looking. Oh, like the shiny crystal is only $7. Ooh, like I can afford that.
Hmm.
But like, what are the greater implications?
Right. And do you actually need it?
Yes.
Do you actually need it? Because that's another part of this commodification is we are marketed to so much
Hmm.
that we have been conditioned to feel like we have to have every single shiny new thing, right?
Hmm.
And the witchcraft space or the spiritual space is no different. Like, here, I've got a crystal for each one of your problems.
Yes. That's the point though. See, so personally, I haven't formally studied social media and marketing, but I've done a lot of like independent studies. So I
Mhm.
kind of, because that was something that was a special interest of mine a couple of years ago. And so I kind of went deep into this little rabbit hole of understanding social media and marketing and how that plays a role in, our buying and our consumption of things. And it's really devious is the only word I can think of when I try to describe it, because marketing, it's meant to play on the emotions of the individual that they're targeting.
Mhm.
And so we see with spirituality, it's a very personal journey, right? And it means something different to each individual. And so they're seeking to do things on their journey, to learn things, to unlearn things, to connect, whatever the case may be. So we see these bigger corporations who are using marketing tactics to play on the spiritual journey or the emotions of the person that they're targeting so that they will go out and buy their products.
Mhm.
So it just
Yeah.
feeds back into that commodification, like you said. And it's difficult to separate the two. Um, there's just really, yeah. That's kind of like a whole other, like I can go on a tangent.
No, no, but you're totally right because marketing is rough. And even as someone like myself with my own channel and my podcast and trying to make sure that like my Instagram posts are seen,
Hmm.
I have to use hashtags
It's
or
necessary,
I'm going to
yeah. Like,
have no engagement. And I'll have no engagement even from the people that follow me
mhm,
because of the way social media works now, where you're given no choice pretty
mhm.
much I mean, except for like maybe Twitter. Twitter, I can organize things the way I want. But like with Instagram, you're given no choice on how your feed is presented to you. They give you what they think you want to see.
Mhm.
And so if you're interacting with all kinds of business posts or pretty sparkly, shiny new things, they're going to give you more of that. And it's just a massive feedback loop. Um,
And it's really interesting that you say that, because we could even take it a step further and say that with social media, it's almost commodifying the individuals who are also using it and participating in it.
yes. Oh, it hurts.
Right? It because then we become, especially as content creators, we become the commodification or the subject that's being commodified
Hmm.
and consumed by other people. But in order for us to be successful as small business owners, or for us to have our content reach the people that we are trying to reach,
Hmm.
we have to participate in it.
It's awful. And I
It really
hate
is.
it. Like, as much as I love what I do and love making the podcast and I love making videos, I hate the back end of it so much,
I think
because it's
most,
like you got to hustle to get yourself out there to be that commodity, and everything has to be shiny and sparkly and pretty, or nobody's going to look at it.
yeah.
And I think that's the same thing goes with like buying things.
Really, it's so crazy. And again, I think it's important to emphasize too that this is such a nuanced, large topic that like we're obviously not going to be able to talk about everything
Oh,
in
for
one
sure.
episode, but
Yeah.
like I think that brings me to my point where we're just talking about previously about like, is it possible for us to even separate the commodification of spirituality from spirituality itself in our spiritual journey or witchcraft or religion? And if so, like what impacts would it have? Because as you said, in order for us to reach the people that we want to reach or to have the business that we want to have, we have to kind of participate in this. And it really has this icky feeling.
Yeah. So in thinking about that, I think the most of the responsibility, I think, would come down to the individual as a consumer, because the individual as a creator, we have to play by their rules. We have to play by the rules that are given to us. So that means doing things to make the algorithm happy and having a schedule and using all the right hashtags. It's only, I think, at the very surface level anyway, the individual that can maybe change the culture by, instead of choosing to buy things from larger corporations who are just there to make a buck off of the spirituality, maybe choosing to instead buy from a small business and unlearning that you don't have to have every single thing ever in the world.
That part.
Yes.
That part right there.
You don't have to have it all.
Well, and I think that that is a huge problem in quote unquote white culture.
Probably, yeah.
It really, because I mean, if we take a look at it, and I don't know if this is going to be a little, spicy.
Go for it. Go for it. I've said some spicy things myself.
Oh, okay. Well, good.
Like the fact that I think the issue with cultural appropriation among white culture has to do with shadow work and feeling like you don't have a culture. Yeah, that's one of.
I've heard a lot of people actually talk about that because it has a lot of truth to it. Like as a white individual, like I really didn't grow up with any sort of culture. Like I was very separate from that. And I mean, I grew up in a Protestant Christian family, so I have a religion that I grew up in, which I later on disconnected from for personal reasons, but that we're not going to get into. But yeah, like, so I was very much separated from any sort of like culture or like sense of community.
Right.
And so we go like seeking for those things, and it can really have a negative impact. And I'm trying to gather my thoughts so that I stay in one direction. But I guess where I was going with that is that like there's very much a sense of, because we don't have a community, or we're separate from a community, and it's like that white culture, we're seeking to find a connection in other places. And in doing so, when we are not properly educated, we are furthering the commodification of other religions and other cultures and spiritualities that we are not entitled to.
Right.
So for example, sage.
Yeah.
Right, within the indigenous community. That's a huge thing in the New Age spirituality. People are pushing sage. And even though the indigenous community have told us, like, this is a sacred plant medicine used for our ceremonies, like this is not for non-native individuals to use, it's still being sold by a lot of new age spiritualists online or small businesses that are
Mm-hmm.
white run, right? So like these
Right.
people that do not have entitlement over this are still using it and commodifying it to make money off of it.
Yeah, I can't go into a shop here in my area without seeing white sage or even Palo Santo. But that brings me to another side of things where I I am familiar with where white sage grows natively. I used to live in the area.
Mm-hmm.
It is I how can I say this? It is kind of due to the commodification of witchcraft and spiritual practices that many people all over the world now have access to things that they wouldn't have had before.
True.
And so I think that, I mean, obviously not white sage. That's not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like I can buy a specially crafted spell oil from someone halfway around the world now. I mean, yes, I would buy it from a small business, but I think that is another side to the commodification of spirituality is that we now have access to things that we maybe wouldn't have had before, which can also be a bad thing because white sage, for example, Palo Santo, for example, but also then that can create a disconnect with our local area because everybody's talking about, use white sage to cleanse or Palo Santo and clear your space. But what about what you already have in your area that grows local,
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know if there are any other sort of ways that this whole thing has been helpful to the wider community. I think it's been more harmful than helpful. But again,
Mm-hmm.
there's a very thin line that we can walk with this commodification of spirituality. And it's very nuanced. There's a lot of different pockets and rabbit holes that we can dive into.
I mean, I completely agree. And like I said previously, I wonder, and I've thought about it, like, is commodification necessary in today's age to preserve some religion and spirituality? Like, is it necessary? And I don't think there's a clear yes or no to this. I think that there has been definitely been more harm to come out of the commodification, but as you said, there has been some good in that it's now more,
Like widespread,
yeah, so it's more,
accessible.
yes, that's the word that I was looking for. um, but is that due to commodification or is that due to kind of where society is going in terms of being perpetually online?
That's a good question. I
Right, because
think
when I
it's a
think of
mixed bag.
yeah, I agree. But again, when I think of commodification, I think of something being, yeah, no, I agree. I think it is a mixed bag because now that I think of it, like it's the consumption of something. And that's essentially what social media is there for, is the consumption.
Yeah, but also too, it's it is the consumption, but if we are doing things the right way, quote unquote right way, it's also the education of what it is that we're consuming. So, for example, back when I was a newer witch, in my early teens, it was white sage. That's what I knew. That's what I had been told by the books that I was reading, and the one shop that I had access to is all they sold for cleansing was white sage.
Mhm.
And then as I got older and as I got more and more online and searching for places to get supplies from, then you run into that. This is white sage. This is used as a sacred medicine for the indigenous tribes of the west coast of uh, jumbling over my words, the west coast of North America. right? The southern west coast of North America. And then I'm like, oh, that's a thing I didn't know before. And so looking for what I was looking for, then I came upon more education. And I also think we can take it a step further in that, when we learn about cultures or practices outside of ourselves, there have been studies that show that it makes people less racist, makes people less of an asshole towards other people. And we find that, I think, in the spaces where we are consuming things, like social media. And so it's a mixed bag of nonsense.
It really is. And I think, like you said, it really comes down to the individual and really taking the time to kind of ask ourselves those questions, like you said previously, about like, do I really need this? Why do I feel like I need this? What purpose does it have? Those sorts of things. Is it even for me to have? Which is another good question to ask. Is there something I can use in replace of it, or in, you know what I mean?
Like as a substitute.
Yeah.
I have to ask myself that question a lot. Do I need this? Is it necessary for whatever it is that I'm doing, for a spell or for a ritual or who knows what? But also to, like, where did it come from? Who made it? Who is responsible for putting it in a store in front of me?
Right.
I think that's a lot of it. And as a consumer, those are things that I think about, and those are things that I think others should be thinking about in order to separate the mass consumption, there's a phrase I'm looking for, like the mass production, I guess, of things. We don't need more things. Yes, distribution. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And again, it's definitely an issue among white culture. And I hate to kind of continue to say that, because no, I don't actually.
Well, it reminds me of colonialism. Like, we come in and we have been taught, or at least I have been taught, that we come here, we take what we need, we take what we want, and that's just what we do.
Yes.
We, as exactly, like, general,
Yeah.
And it's definitely been something to unlearn. And yeah.
No, I completely agree. And that's one of the reasons why I was really excited to come on today and talk to you about this, because, like, I think it is, especially as a white individual, it is I feel like I take responsibility in terms of talking to other white individuals about this, and bringing it to a conversation, because it needs to be talked about, because a lot of the onus is we're putting it on other cultures and other communities, and it's not their responsibility to educate us in why it's not okay for us to commodify their spirituality or their religion or their culture.
Right. And I have had that conversation with a few people where they have asked me why I don't use white sage, or why I recommend others not to use white sage. And in the United States, the indigenous people that were here first could not practice their beliefs until like the 1960s or 70s, I believe it was.
78, I think.
It's 78?
I think so.
I'm going to look it up really quick. But in 1978, my mom was a kid. Like, that wasn't that long ago.
Right. My mom was a kid too.
Let's see.
And, it's interesting, because I like what you said about the fact that, there is very much a sense of entitlement. And I think that's where the commodification of spirituality and religions come from, is that sense of entitlement, in terms of, if we're not talking about mainstream media, because, that's, I think, that's different than if we're talking about like the commodification of other cultures that are not ours, or
Right.
spiritual practices that are not ours. Is that there is a sense of entitlement. Like, we do, as white people, have this unconscious or inherent bias that we need to we need to unlearn, or we need to dissect and figure out why it is that we feel like this is necessary for us to use, or for us to have, or that we should be entitled to learning something, or having something, or practicing something.
Right. And just because we can learn about it doesn't mean we can do it.
That part. Yep.
Like, I can
That's it.
I can get a book about how to perform heart surgery, but I'm not a doctor. Please don't
Exactly.
trust me to do heart surgery on you. Just because I read about it in a book doesn't mean it's okay for me to do.
Right. And I think it's
and it was
definitely,
1978. Sorry, it was.
yeah.
You were right.
The funny thing is I know this because is it okay if I tell a story?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so recently I had a discussion with an Indigenous creator, educator on Instagram. They had posted some information in regards to sacred plants used in their medicines and ceremonies. And they were asking some common or answering some common questions in regards to sage and some of the other sacred plants like sweetgrass and cedar and tobacco. And they had mentioned that it was 1978, but they had talked about. So I'm constantly learning, and I'm not perfect, and I'm going to make mistakes. And in this case, I did make a mistake. I have cedar on my property, and it lines the perimeter of my home. And so, without thinking, I was not educated. I was ignorant. Without thinking, I decided to use some of the cedar to make an herb bundle, not realizing that it is one of their sacred medicines, and that that's not for me to use in my spiritual practices. Now, there are going to be differing opinions within the Indigenous community, of course, but as a general rule, like, that is their sacred medicine. So to use that is, as a non-native person, is, in my opinion, not okay. Right? Like, I'm not entitled to that. And so, like, during the conversation we talked about, that was something that they had brought up. They had brought up, like, first and foremost, obviously, speak to the stewards of my land, where I am, because they're going to be the individuals to speak to on this, not somebody that lives across the world. Even though somebody who lives across the world, an Indigenous person, should still be respected, and we should still listen to them. The Indigenous community within my area is who I should be speaking to first and foremost. But they raised some really good points in terms of, asking myself why it is I feel like I need to be using this, why it is I feel I need to use cedar to connect to my spirituality, or to connect to the land, why I'm using this instead of, if there are, other things or other tools that I could be using. And I think that that's something that, as a white person, does not come naturally to us, or to me, because we are raised in a society that caters to us. I don't know how else to put it. Like, I really don't know how else to put it. Like, there's so much implicit bias or unconscious bias that we need to kind of work through, that is the result of white supremacy and our society, and the way that it's built in capitalism. And it all kind of is intertwined. But I guess that story was basically just to kind of go along with what I was going to say, which is commodification versus appropriation and exploitation. Like, they're so intertwined that a lot of the times when we have this spiritual practice, or this tool that's of a spiritual practice or culture, we have to really be careful, because the commodification of it, like sage, is very harmful to communities such as the Indigenous community. So yeah, I don't know if that was a tangent and if that made any sense, but yeah.
No, I get it. It's because, like, you went through that experience where it's what you have available to you, and it's what you knew, and there weren't really any questions asked. I mean, I get it. I probably would have done the same thing.
Right. And it was
um,
definitely a learning experience for me, because like it really brought forth the fact that like, oh, I need to be more conscious of that. And I need to be checking these things. Like,
mhm.
instead of automatically jumping to how can I use this in my practice, why wasn't I looking at it like, why don't I learn more about cedar? You know?
Right. And that can be like transposed on just about anything.
Hmm.
Why do I feel like I have to have, I don't know, this oracle deck in front of me? Why do I need it? Right?
Hmm.
Or why do I need the shiny crystal or the um over harvested sage or even juniper? Or I mean, I don't think juniper's endangered, but why do we need those things? We're not really taught to ask those sorts of questions. We see it, we want it, we take it, we use it.
And that's the issue, I think, with the commodification, is that like, and
Mm-hmm.
social media's role in commodification, especially because like, back to the story about the cedar, I created a reel showing the process of me making a cedar bundle with it and speaking about cedar, but I didn't mention anything in terms of how cedar was a sacred plant to the
Mm-hmm.
indigenous community, its history, anything along those lines. However, in the comment section, there were many people asking like, are you going to be selling this? How can I get this? How do I make this? And I mean, it was my responsibility to do the research and learn more about it. So, of course, that falls on me as a creator, but also looking to the people in the comment section, they're not asking themselves those questions either. And I think social media plays a large role in perpetuating um,
The
that
cycle.
idea. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Because they're asking, how can I have this? Not how can I, do something similar with the stuff in my own area.
right. And why
And
do you feel like you need it? Just because this person online who you don't have any sort of connection with other than that you follow them,
mhm,
um, and parasocial relationships are a whole other nuanced conversation that I can get into, that I think also kind of tie into the commodification of spirituality.
right.
But like, you don't know me. I'm just a person online, a face on the screen, and you see me using this. And so because I'm online, and in some cases I'm viewed as quote unquote an authority,
Mhm.
because I share some parts of my spiritual journey and my witchcraft. Now I have people looking to me for knowledge, for tips, for tools, for whatever the case may be. And so again, we have that. Um, again, what I'm trying to say is, I guess it does fall on us as consumers, but it also does fall on us as community to kind of check those things and to mention those things, and
Mhm.
right, like, call it out when it's necessary.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, so as for the things that, like the harm that commodification does and the small slivers of good that it can do, what can we do about it?
That's a good
Like
question.
it's a hard question because especially with our global community now, because everybody is online, we have access to so many different perspectives, so many different people and situations, whether they be bad or good. This digital age of information, we can have all of it. And oftentimes it's very easy to get overwhelmed with everything that we
Mm.
see, hear, read, experience. But it's also at the same time hard for us to pull back from the global community because it's where we feel our connection.
Yes.
So it often makes me feel very, very, very tiny and very helpless and
Hmm.
powerless in these types of situations. And especially like I equate it with living a more sustainable life. Yes, I can do everything that I can do as an individual, but it's a global problem. And so it often makes me feel like while I'm doing what I can, it's not enough.
Yeah.
So I guess I kind of want to talk about what we can do to help sort of combat this issue without getting rid of like the community connections that we can create, and the access to information. Because I mean, while it sucks, I have learned so much from being online and having a YouTube channel and a podcast and interacting with other people in the community, creators, and what do I call non-creative, like individuals?
Right, people on the internet.
People on the internet, you know. Like there's, I don't know. I don't know what we can do, but I do know that the commodification of spirituality hurts my heart, I guess is the only way that I can describe it. To see that crystal vending machine, my heart just went and like dropped, because I understand when small businesses need to do things to keep their business afloat, but I also think that businesses who are in this space should have more self-awareness and understand why they're in the space to begin with. Like my crochet, I've been crocheting since I was a kid, but the things that I create are part product because it's a small business, but it's also part devotion because of my polytheism and my work with Bridget. It's a devotional thing. And I'm in the space for the community, not to make $1 million, right? Yeah. If I was in the community to make $1 million, I would come up with a crystal vending machine. And I'm going to be salty about it.
That's so good. I think it's a great question. And honestly, I agree. Like, since being online, I've learned so much, and I've changed so much. And I'm fairly new to being online in this space. It's only been a couple of years since I've really actively been in the spiritual space online.
Yeah, me too.
I think one of the things that I can offer to your listeners, Megan, in terms of my opinion, would be to diversify. And that's particularly why I have learned so much, is because of what I hate to use the word, but what I consume online, but also who I follow. Because we do see so much commodification of spirituality and tools and practices and so forth. I think it's important to have people outside of our bubble that we are looking to, that we are listening to, because it's not hard to learn that sage is not for us if we follow any Indigenous people online. If we listen to any people within the Indigenous community, we would know that it's not for us. So I think, yeah, the first step would definitely be, for me, would be to diversify what type of content you are consuming and the people that you are looking to learn from.
That's a really good one. And it made me think of breaking the cycle of only looking at things that are pretty. And I'm guilty of this, of my Instagram feed being perfectly curated photographs.
Yes.
But that's not real life. And it helps perpetuate the cycle of commodification, because the people that you follow, or even the corporation like Meta for Instagram, sees that you only want to look at beautifully curated pictures of very specific things. And that's not real life. And I have made it a point to check out the people that follow me on Instagram, and see what they're sharing and what they're doing. And if I'm curious about it, or if I feel like it is, you know, helpful to me in one form or another, I will follow those people back. And generally, those people aren't posting for the sake of, um, gaining followers or sharing information. They're posting about their life and their personal practices and their personal, inspirations. And, but yeah, I think that it's really important to follow the people who aren't there to make a following on social media, because
Yes.
it shows authenticity and it gives you a new perspective that you might not have had before. But if enough people do it, if enough people say that they are fed up with being fed these perfectly curated ads and suggested posts, then maybe we'll get lucky and the system will change.
Mm.
But that's part of being a consumer, that whole phrase of voting with your dollar.
Yes.
That's kind of where I'm going with that. Vote with your follow button or your subscribe button
Yes.
and your comments and your hearts and your shares. Don't just share the popular stuff. Don't just follow the popular people. That also creates an echo chamber of commodification of all of the same people. And then we get this teeny tiny little bubble that we never see anything outside of.
Yes.
So I think that is super important.
I think that's a great point, and that kind of triggered a thought from me that, like, I think another piece of advice that I would give to your listeners in terms of like how we can combat the commodification is, instead of coming from a place of, or sorry, not that you shouldn't come from a place of wanting to practice your spirituality, but when you approach a new concept, when you approach a new tool or whatever the case may be, I think the first thing that we should be looking to do is seek to learn, not anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the times our first initial response is to consume. Um, and I guess it could be argued that learning from an individual or learning from something is also a form of consumption, but I think it does less harm to sit and to listen and to learn than it would be to automatically go and try to put this cultural or spiritual practice into yours, or
Mm-hmm.
to start using this tool that you've done really little research on.
Right.
Where it comes from, its purpose, its value to the community that it comes from. Those sorts of things I think are super important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, to go off of that, one of the reasons um, we seek to commodify is essentially because a lot of the times people feel displaced from religion or spirituality. And I think this comes from like the mainstream religion,
Mm-hmm.
Christianity. So you either have religious trauma, or you have people who have completely separated themselves from the religion because of the trauma or because of their disagreement of how things are being um, portrayed or organized, or I can't think of the word I'm looking for. But does that make sense?
I think so. I
Right.
think I'm following where you're going with that.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that because we have such a large group of individuals who feel displaced and who feel like they don't have any sort of spiritual or religious belonging, they're looking for that belonging somewhere else. And I think
Okay.
that's where the commodification stems from, is because they're looking for that belonging somewhere else. They're looking to practice some spiritual path or journey, or they're looking to practice witchcraft, seeking to find somewhere else that they belong.
That makes sense. Okay. I get
Okay.
it. It took me a second, but I got
Yeah, sometimes I go like in circles.
it. That's okay. But yeah, no, when you put it that way, it makes sense, because you've got these people who essentially feel like they're outside of the box and all of the cool stuff is in the box. So they need to find their way inside the box.
Right.
And that perpetuates the cycle of commodification. Another thought that I had was just stop consuming. Just
Right.
stop being a consumer. And in that sense, I don't mean like stop buying groceries and, whatever. But we as individuals are the ones that perpetuate the cycle of consumption.
Mm-hmm.
And when enough people are keeping that cycle going, it's obviously going to keep going, right? But it's like if you have a tandem bicycle that has 3 seats and all 3 seats need to be occupied for it to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
When one person gets off, it slows down. When 2 people get off, it's almost impossible to keep it going. So I think we should, as individuals, again, ask ourselves those questions of, do I need this? Why do I need this? Can I get it from somewhere like a small business or an individual creator? Can I find this in connection with my own land? Like if it's a wand or something, can I find a fallen stick and make one myself?
Mm-hmm.
Do I need to buy the pretty fancy thing from the major corporation that doesn't care about me?
Yeah.
Did my analogy with the tandem bicycle make sense? It just popped in my head.
Yeah, I think so. Like it's going to slow momentum, so it's not going to be as fast spreading if we slowly start to or stop commodifying religion or spirituality.
Yes.
However,
Okay.
that made me think of a previous point that we were talking about. Like, are we able to separate commodification from spiritual practices? Because, and this is why I say this, there are individuals within that spiritual practice or religion who will end up having to commodify it in order to have some sort of livelihood. So,
okay,
what I mean by that is going back to the conversation or the story that I told earlier about the post for sacred medicines. One of the questions asked was, well, why can't I buy sage if an indigenous person is selling it? And to which they replied, what an indigenous person does with their sacred medicines is none of your concern.
Mm-hmm.
However, they have been forced into a place where it is necessary for them to possibly sell it or to share it in some way to maybe stop information, stop appropriation, or maybe just to provide for themselves and their family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, I'm not sure if we can completely separate commodification and spirituality.
I think you're right. My brain though is going to it separates commodification by large corporations versus commodification from people in our community that mean well.
Okay.
And that's, for me, that's a very distinct separation, because we have people that mean well, people who truly care about what they're doing and who truly believe in the products that they make or the things that they sell. And then you have people that join the community just to sell their stuff and make a buck off of us. And then you've got the corporations who can afford to sell things at a massively cheaper price because they're large corporations.
Right.
So with that separation, that's why I say that if you're going to buy something, buy it from a small business, buy it from a creator, an individual who doesn't have massive amounts of tax breaks and loopholes and underpaid staff. And then, the other side, you're not also supporting someone who joined the community just to sell their stuff. I think that's where that separation needs to be made. Because you're right, there are going to be times where commodification is necessary, especially for things that have to be created by very specific people. But those things aren't considered closed to others. They just have certain, processes or rituals or whatever that go into the creation of that. And then the final thing can be sold to whoever.
Right.
So yes, I
I
think
get
that
what
is
you're
my answer
saying.
to that question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I get what you're saying. And I think at that point, my mind would basically, my mind is essentially like, if it is coming from an individual within that community to share their culture, to stop the perpetuation of misinformation, is it actually commodification?
That's a good question.
Right? Because for me personally, I guess I view commodification more so as like like you said, for profit and for
Yeah,
clout.
for profit. And I mean, obviously the whole point of owning a business, first of all, is to make money.
Yes.
That's like business 101. But when you get into communities such as ours, where there's a lot of heart and spirit behind what we do, that sort of becomes not the only reason for having a business. So yeah, I think when we get into those particular business owners or creators, I don't think I would necessarily call that commodification. When I think of commodification, I think of Walmart or Five Below or, whatever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. The other side of that too is that a lot of the times these people who are sharing parts of spirituality to make profit are generally detaching what they're looking to commodify from its context,
Yes,
which is very
that's a
harmful.
whole other conversation.
Right? Yeah. Yeah. But it's super harmful and it happens a lot within our community.
It does. It does. And I see it too within my sphere of paganism, because I consider myself a Celtic pagan. I
Mhm.
focus mainly on Irish practices, but there is so much crap out there within Celtic paganism, because the Celtic areas are considered or seen as quote unquote other and exotic
Mhm.
and um, like steeped in spirituality, and the land is just alive and like all of this stuff, but it's caused a lot of harm because of a whole other slew of things. Maybe one day I will have the ability to speak with somebody about that too, because that would be an interesting conversation.
I agree with you. I would be interested in listening to that. It actually made me think of um, Firelight's book, Dabbler's Guide to
Mm,
Witchcraft,
mm-hmm.
because they talk about it within that, and they raise an interesting point that a lot of the times people who are coming into the pagan and the spiritual community, um, they're coming from a place of looking to replace the previous religion or spirituality. So
Mm-hmm.
they're forcing previous beliefs and context into something that doesn't necessarily fit. So it's like a square peg in a circle hole, right? Like
Yeah.
they're trying to put their previous beliefs that may not necessarily fit into Christianity anymore and bringing it over into paganism, and it doesn't work like
Yeah,
that.
it doesn't work. It
Yeah.
does not work. Sort of like the cycle of commodification in witchcraft.
Yeah. It's a lot.
It is so much, so much. But thank you so much for coming and talking with me about commodification of spiritual practices. This has been such a great conversation, and you have shared some amazing insights, and I've even gotten a couple of different perspectives. I think that we even have some answers for some things that we can do as individuals to help stop the cycle and keep things spiritual instead of profitable, as for me at least, that's important. Yeah, do you want to tell people where they can find you online, or do you want me to just leave all the links in the show notes?
um, yeah. First of all, yeah, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. I
Of
really enjoyed
course.
it. I think it's definitely an important topic. So for people who are listening, would like to find me, you can find me on Instagram at The Witch from the North. Same with YouTube. I sometimes post to Twitter. So if you like Twitter, you can find me The Witch from N, because there's not enough space.
Mm-hmm.
But that's pretty much the only active platforms that I use.
Yay. Well, thank you so much, Betty, for coming to talk with me. This has been amazing, and I hope anybody listening has gotten some new perspectives. And I always welcome comments and suggestions from anyone that has listened, wherever you want to leave your comment, just find a place, I guess. And yeah, I will talk to you all in the next episode. Thanks again, Betty.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening in to my chat with Betty about the commodification of spirituality and witchcraft. I hope this episode gave you a new perspective or some things to think about. As we said, this is a heavily nuanced topic with a lot of moving parts and pieces. I feel that we have only scratched the surface of what is probably a systemic issue. Let's go ahead and draw our tarot card for the month of April. Today, I am drawing from my traditional manga tarot. Let's give it a shuffle and see what we get. Okay, so we got the Lovers reversed. This card depicts Adam and Eve in a garden with Eve holding an apple in her hand. The Lovers reversed indicates an imbalance in our lives somewhere. Conflicts and contention might be taking place. We might also have trouble making decisions. So this month, think about the Lovers reversed. How can you best bring balance into your personal relationships? Are the choices you make the right ones for you and your situation? Do you tend to argue for the sake of arguing or hearing your own voice? And lastly, are you avoiding your responsibilities? Again, thank you so much for listening. If you have comments, questions, or suggestions, please reach out to me. My contact information is always in the show notes, and you can find me on social media. Remember also to check out Betty, the Witch from the North, on their social media. All of the links will be in the show notes. And with that, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.